Is Russia increasingly pulling its forces out from Bakhmut? Is Ukraine taking advantage? And is Russia trying to get the Wagner group back in the fight? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's September 12th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, first, taking a look at the combat map, the only notable change today is actually in Klitschivka, of all places. You can see here the 83rd Separate Guards Air Assault Brigade. That's a VDV unit, so one of Russia's better units. You could see withdrawing basically its line of control behind this windbreak here. As we talked about, I think this is likely where Russia foresees its forces digging in, so to speak. But the remainder of the village of Klitschivka is currently being cleared. So while Ukraine isn't claiming that it's liberated, it seems fairly apparent to me that the overwhelming majority of the village is probably going to fall into Ukrainian hands relatively shortly. What's also interesting, again, we had heard that allegedly some Russian forces were withdrawing from Andriivka, but that hasn't been confirmed yet. But again, I think the same tactical calculus is at work, right? You can see these forces in Andriivka subject to Ukrainian fire from the north, south, and west. I wouldn't want to trade places. And it makes sense that they're going to want to withdraw probably behind this river obstacle here, or possibly even just use this cleared area between these rail lines as kind of a open ground to dig an entrenched position here. I think that's what we're going to see here in the very near future. Moving over to, there we go. Moving over to the combat map, you could see two notable changes here. First off, we see Ukrainian forces reporting progress south towards Melitopol, to the south and southeast of Robdina. So you could see this is significant for a couple of reasons. First off, it shows that Ukrainian forces on the cusp, really, of beginning the liberation of Novoprokopivka, and also critically, they are advancing along Novoprokopivka's flanks. And as we talked about, being able to occupy this salient is going to be beneficial to Ukraine for a couple of reasons. And we'll take a quick look at some of this fortification mapping, and you can see what I'm talking about. First off, being able to advance more and really get into the proper areas of Novoprokopivka. They're right now establishing what are probably going to be support by fire positions. I think they want to own this entire forested area that can provide cover in the form of both mortar and direct weapon fire into large portions of this village. It's also going to provide cover for forces to assemble and prepare for their assaults. You also want to have, of course, some forces operating on the flanks here, right? Because standard NATO tactics, right? Fix and flank. So these forces here can fix these Russian formations, of which there's a lot. The 1430th, the 70th, and the 210th, and additional units from bars, all deployed in this very small area. This looks really almost like, I wouldn't call it a last stand, but I'm surprised to see this many Russian units deployed this far forward. It may say to me that Russia may be feeling like it's got to make some priorities about where it's choosing to defend. So as Ukrainian forces are going to flank occupy this zone here, they can use that flank to apply a lot more pressure onto the forces in Novoprokopivka. So I think we're still firmly in the preparatory phase of these efforts. But I think a decisive defeat of these units, again, you'd have to use fire to pin them into place, right? Not let them withdraw through this road here, not let them withdraw back to these fighting positions, but pin them in place, which they may be pinned, because remember, there's a lot of minefields. And I would totally believe you if you told me this whole area was mined here, right? So in some ways, Russia may be starting to possibly become a victim of its own mining operations, which are tough, but have also perhaps pinned these forces here. You fix them with these units in basically this forested area, right? Don't let them break cover and run, and then you flank around, right? You'd have to. The catch for Ukraine, the tactical challenge, is that they've got to get into these fortified positions. They can't flank with Russian forces sitting in these trenches. So they've got to seize or at least deny Russian forces the ability to come out of their trenches and then push into Novoprokopivka, or at least push in using fires. So potentially a pretty decisive defeat for Russia if Ukraine can effectively pin these forces in place, which I think they're well on their way to doing, as we can see. The other notable changes, of course, Russian forces launching about 30 combat engagements. That seems to be the pace of Russian counterattacking. They're reporting them all in the east, except for, of course, these couple of counterattacks. Generally, this seems to be Russia's MO. I think they're trying to push from this Kopani direction, trying to apply pressure to this main road that's probably resupplying a lot of the fighting forces in Rubtina and that are in Verbova as well. So I suspect that's kind of Russia's strategy here with their counterattacks. And of course, you see they're continuing to try to disrupt in all the places that we've seen Ukraine have some advances, right? Outside of Andriivka, outside of Klitschivka, and Bakhmut, as well as in the north. Now, if you're interested in seeing some of the videos of this fighting today, I'm going to be taking a look at some of the trench warfare videos as well as some of the armored warfare videos from the fighting in and around Novoprokopivka that have dropped this week. And that's on combatvetnews.com. This is my site because Patreon and YouTube won't let me show even a thumbnail of combat footage. I tried to even do like a drone clearing a mine, so no human beings in the video at all, and YouTube still demonetized me. So if you're interested in supporting the channel, any one of these tiers is going to get you access to the members-only content and the exclusive room on the Discord. The Discord is super popular. There's obviously a ton of free rooms, but the exclusive rooms are great. They're like a Ukraine OSINT room. But the members-only content, right? Videos drop twice a week, and again, I can't even show you the thumbnails. That's how intensive they are. So if you're interested, take a look at combatvetnews.com. Link is in the description. It should probably also be appearing like up here. And thanks again to everybody from combatvetnews.com who supports me. Okay, one other note. This is from Twitter or X, and bear in mind, right? It says 12 September, 13:30 Universal Time. So I think that's midnight Eastern Time. I'm not sure. But this is probably the most recent up to date. Again, I have no verification that this is true. But here's what's interesting. That there were 10 Russian counter-assaults coming in from Rubtina. But that some reports indicate that after pushing back these 10 assaults, that the 1430th Regiment has already been defeated north of Novoprokopivka. So you can see here, that is, I think, these guys right here, the 1430th, a motorized rifle regiment. Now, there's still, bear in mind, 2 other regiments here in addition to the bar squad. So still a considerable portion, allegedly, of Russia's combat power has been defeated, basically because they went on offense. Right, there's reports that Ukrainian forces making it through a Russian minefield, really getting very close to Novoprokopivka. So it looks like, if this is true, that they may be beginning to start some of their preparatory work, right? Clearing routes through minefields, advancing beyond some of this forested area, digging in and trying to prevent Russian forces who are counterattacking. Likely, this is probably, my guess would be, these are spoiling attacks, right? As Ukraine prepares for its big push by clearing minefields, likely targeting some of the logistics and munitions stores near the front lines, creating target lists for their artillery, and softening up Russian fighting positions with things like cluster munitions. Russia itself wants to disrupt these efforts by launching a series of attacks. And it looks like the 1430th was probably the ones that drew the short end of the stick. That's my thesis anyway. Right, you can see, again, you've got continued fighting near Verbova, but it's not really clear, again, who is in charge here. You can see you've got Ukrainian forces continuing to push, Russian forces counterattacking. I think the greatest pressure Ukraine seems to be applying is here in Novoprokopivka. And I think the belief is that by pushing into this area, they're going to force Russia to make increasingly hard decisions about where they're going to deploy their troops. And again, we look like we've in some ways got our answer with these troops deployed here, where you can see that supposedly there's just a bar squad and a reconnaissance battalion trying to hold Verbova. So it may be a case, I guess, more bars. So it looks like the priority is, again, this fighting in Novoprokopivka, for Russia at least. What I also thought was really interesting, first off, Wagner Group, right? Allegedly, the Rosguardia, this is Ministry of Interior troops that are still fighting both inside Ukraine, but also are responsible for many domestic security functions, have supposedly been actively recruiting former Wagner Group fighters. This is probably an effort to bring Wagner elements into a Russian chain of command, into an official Russian entity. And what would be interesting is that, Prigozhin's beef, you may remember, was entirely with the Russian Ministry of Defense. So by recruiting them into the Rosguardia under the Russian Ministry of Interior, the Kremlin is sort of bypassing the moral opposition a former Wagner fighter might have to the MOD. And most critically, it would prevent Wagner from being highly trained, combat effective, heavily armed, and very disenfranchised with the government. Because if you've seen any country at all, you know that a highly trained armed force, who's a little disenfranchised, who's a little upset with the people in power, they can become a tremendous problem. And for decades, right? Like it's not like it would be a problem right now, but Wagner troops, man, one of the things that you just don't understand if you haven't served in combat is like, some people come back and they're very embittered about their units, but man, for most people, that loyalty to wherever your loyalty lies remains like lifelong. It is really weird. I mean, you can see literally on my own, you can see behind me, I keep the crossed pistols of the military police corps because I have such a high loyalty to my service as an MP. I can give you reasons, I can give you rationale, but fundamentally, I think it's just an emotional thing that happens when you've put your life on the line for something. You bond with that thing. And the fear that Russia has is that these Wagner fighters, right, they are increasingly, they feel loyal to Wagner Group, even though it doesn't really even exist anymore. And they're definitely opposed to the Ministry of Defense that they see that destroyed them, despite them being probably the best fighting force, or at least the fighting force with the best results in this war on the Russian side. So the needle that the Kremlin has to thread is to get these Wagner troops inside the tent, so to speak. And I think their efforts to bring them into the Rosguardia may actually be an effective way to do it. Now, obviously, right, one person, according to one source within Russia, they claimed that ex-Wagner fighters are actually serving in this Rosguardia unit, including those with no conventional military experience. I mean, let's be honest here for a second. If you've served in Wagner Group during the past 12 months or so, you've got conventional military experience. But what they mean is they haven't gone through a government-backed basic training program, which is fair. And that some ex-Wagner fighters are sent to guard, quote, strategic objects in occupied Ukraine, so likely doing behind-the-lines guard work. This, of course, is likely an effort to both solve Rosguardia's increasing manpower problem and make them more combat effective following the armed rebellion by Wagner itself. as well as to replenish some of the more effective combat units, right? Rosguardia has some elite and highly effective units focusing like on anti-drug type work. But they've been gutted to go fight in Ukraine, and someone has to come in and fill the gaps. And logically, you can replace your elite anti-drug units with convicted drug dealers in the form of Wagner Group. But, you know, again, you see why Russia's doing this, and I'm sure we all also see the problem with taking a class of criminals who absolutely hate the Russian government. And if they hated it when the Russian government set them in jail, they hate them more after serving in Wagner Group, and then making them actual members of law enforcement. Do you see how this could become an issue for Russia? Anyway, in good news for Putin, he has won the election. In fact, guys, all of his candidates, every candidate he personally endorsed, also won by huge margins. Right? And united Russia 83% of the vote and occupied Zaporizhzhia, which is incredible given that there's like no ethnic Russians there. Maybe they let all the conscripts vote. And of course, we're talking about around 75% of the popular vote for this United Russia Party. Only 2 small regions had non-Russia United governor candidates win. And this is where Communist Party incumbents were reelected. So, Russia, of course, maintaining the farce of a multi-party democracy with one very popular party is the illusion. Obviously, the truth is that Putin is in charge. Putin has decided who's going to win these elections. He knows exactly who the opposition is going to get to be. They are these handful of Communist Party members, likely catering to a much older Russian citizen who probably feels warm and fuzzy about seeing the Communist Party still be in charge of something. But again, there's not really any opposition that exists as a political force in Russia. And at this point, there's not really any military force either. Anyway, guys, that's all I had for you for today. Thank you so much to the Colonel tier members of CombatVetNews.com. Thank you so much to the Lieutenant tier members of CombatVetNews.com. And of course, thanks to all the members of CombatVetNews.com. I really couldn't do this without you guys. I appreciate your support so much. And if you want to join us today for today's video, check us out at CombatVetNews.com. Links in the description. See you in the next one. Cheers.